So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Happy Thanksgiving, those who are in America and watching this rather than the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. It's still happening. So again, I'm filling in for Venerable Children, whose 2 lines talk about attaining Buddhahood to benefit all sentient beings. So if you're familiar with and comfortable with that idea, what we call Bodhichitta, the aspiration to become a Buddha, fully awakened, fully enlightened, in order to help all other beings to be free of all suffering and its causes, and to achieve all happiness and its causes, and lead them on the path all the way up to enlightenment themselves. So if you're comfortable with that as your motivation for being here, listening to these teachings and whatever else we're doing during this period of time, so bring that into your mind. Remind yourself of that motivation. Think that's why you're here. If you're not familiar with or comfortable with that, if that might seem too lofty, too out of reach for you, then just try to bring as much compassion and kindness and the wish to benefit others as you are able to into your heart, and think that you're here to learn ways in which you can be more kind and compassionate and helpful to others and to the world, and make that your motivation for being here. So we are continuing to do a review of this text by Shantideva, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Last time we were on chapter 3 and we got up to verse 22. And we did a meditation on giving our body, imagining the elements of our body, earth, water, fire, wind, absorbing into the external 4 elements, and then using those to supply living beings with whatever they need, whatever will bring them happiness, and so on. And then the commentary I'm looking at is by Abbot Dragpa Gyaltsen. He's not the Sakya Dragpa Gyaltsen, but Geluk Dragpa Gyaltsen, who was the abbot of an important monastery in Amdo, northeast Tibet, called Tashikil. He was also a student of Jamyang, I think, Jamyang, what's his name? Kunken Jamyang Shekpa. Yeah, Kunken Jamyang Shekpa. So anyway, he wrote a commentary that I've been looking at, and at this point in his commentary, he quotes some verses from Nagarjuna's text, homage to Bodhichitta, praise to Bodhichitta, and those verses talk about how all the suffering that is experienced in samsara, such as being born in unfortunate states like an animal, hungry ghost, and hell, and all the sufferings one experiences in those realms, and also here in the human realm. So all the various kinds of sufferings experienced in samsara is the result of harming sentient beings, not having love and compassion and kindness, and instead doing harmful things to sentient beings, like killing them, beating them, torturing them, and so on. And on the other hand, all the happiness within samsara, all the good experiences, such as being born in fortunate realms like human and the deva realms, and all the stages of the path up to Buddhahood. So all those good experiences are the result of helping sentient beings, acting with kindness and compassion, benevolence, doing what's beneficial for them. And so if we can see that, if we can understand that, he says we should stop being attached to our own welfare alone, just me doing whatever is good for me alone, and cultivate compassion and bodhicitta. So that's just the gist of it without reading the actual verses. And in Shantideva's text, the next two verses 23 and 24, talk about this commitment to helping sentient beings, generating bodhicitta and following the bodhisattva's path, and becoming fully enlightened Buddha to be able to help all sentient beings. And those two verses are used sometimes in ceremonies to give the Bodhisattva vows. There's different ways that Bodhisattva vows can be given, but sometimes these two verses are used. The master, the person giving the vows, will recite them little by little, and then the participants repeat them afterwards 3 times. So that's a way of taking the Bodhisattva vows. And in the commentary, this commentary by Dr. Gyaltsen, he describes a very beautiful practice that can be done to, take on the Bodhisattva vows. And I thought it would be nice to do this practice together. I'll just read most of the words that he gives, and we can do a meditation on it, especially since it's Thanksgiving Day. And this is a way we can give thanks to sentient beings who have all been our kind mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and teachers and providers of food and clothes and so on and so forth. So all the happiness, all the good things we've experienced in this life, as well as our past lives, come from others. So we're dependent on other sentient beings. So it's only natural that we do something to repay their kindness. So this is something we can do in a meditative way. So the practice involves visualizing the Buddha above one's head and thinking that this image of the Buddha is one with one's own spiritual teacher, if you have one or more than one. So you think, this is my teacher in the form of the Buddha. And all other objects of refuge as well. So they're all embodied in that one figure of the Buddha. And then there's some prayers, taking refuge, offering the 7 limbs. And then there's a contemplation, a kind of extended contemplation on cultivating compassion and love, and doing Tonglen, doing a Tonglen practice with regard to all sentient beings. And following all of that, then you think, well, if I really want to help sentient beings in an actual way, I need to become a Buddha myself. And then you can recite these verses of taking the Bodhisattva vows. Okay, so you can get into a comfortable position for meditation. And imagine above the top of your head is the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, sitting upon a seat consisting of a lotus and moon. And if you have a guru, spiritual teacher, spiritual mentor, or more than one, you can think that this image of the Buddha is one with your teachers. And the color of his body is gold, made of light. The whole visualization should be seen as light, not solid material, but pure light, transparent and clear and bright, radiant. He has one face and two arms. His right hand is in the earth-touching gesture, and his left in his lap in the meditation gesture, holding an alms bowl filled with nectar. And he's wearing the 3 saffron robes of a monk. His expression is peaceful and smiling. You can imagine him looking at all sentient beings with an expression of absolute compassion, unconditional, universal compassion and love for every being throughout the universe. And he has the 32 signs and 80 marks of a Buddha. You don't need to know what all those are, but just feel that they're there. And he sits with his legs crossed in the Vajra or full lotus posture and surrounded by light. And if you can, imagine 3 syllables at his 3 places, at the crown or inside the crown of his head is the white Om. At his throat a red Ah. And at his heart a blue Hum. And the Hum at his heart is standing in the center of a moon disk, and around the edge of the moon disk, the letters of the mantra, Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Soha, radiating light. So just do your best to create this visualization in your mind. Don't worry if you can't see all the details or if they don't appear clearly. Try to at least feel that the Buddha is there in the space above your head, and that he embodies not only your own spiritual teachers, but all objects of refuge, all Buddhas, all the Dharma, all the Sangha. And then the text goes on to offer the 7 limbs. So I'll just read it and you can follow along mentally, offering these 7 limbs for accumulating merit and purifying negativities. To the nature of exalted compassion, the Guru, Lord of Subduers, respectfully I pay homage with my body, speech, and mind. I make all offerings without exception, those actually laid out and those mentally emanated. I confess all my negativities and downfalls accumulated since beginningless time. I rejoice in all the roots of virtue of ordinary beings and Aryas. I urge you to turn the wheel of Dharma for migrating beings. I request you to stay eternally without entering nirvana. I dedicate all these virtues to the welfare of migrating beings. And then in your own mind, make requests to the Buddha, inseparable from your spiritual teachers and all objects of refuge, asking for help, for guidance, to be able to understand the Dharma correctly and be able to put it into practice so that your mind will change, will transform, become free of mistaken, unwise, unskillful states such as anger, attachment, ignorance, and so forth, and all wrong views. And that you will be able to develop within your mind all the positive qualities: love, compassion, bodhichitta, wisdom, understanding the true nature of things, and so on. And that in that way be able to progress along the path, attaining the various stages, realizations of the path, and finally reaching Buddhahood yourself. Now imagine that in response to your requests, streams of light flow down from the Buddha above your head and fill your body completely. And the light clears away all adverse conditions. You can think your afflictive emotions, your mistaken states of mind, your karma, all your sufferings, all these negative things get totally purified, disappear, become non-existent. And your mind becomes blessed or inspired or nourished to be able to attain all good qualities and all the realizations of the path. And then contemplate the following words. It's kind of talking about some of the main aspects of the path to enlightenment. I have attained such a good support of the freedoms and endowments, in other words, the precious human rebirth, which is difficult to attain. I am being taken care of by a guru, spiritual mentor, who is a fully qualified spiritual friend. If I do not accomplish the Dharma at this time, when I have self-power over the accomplishment of the Dharma, when will I? This time I must not make a wrong choice between drinking the nectar of the land of the gods and drinking the blazing molten metal of hell. So we have a choice, how we use our life, to create the cause of happiness or to create the cause of suffering. Also, I will not stay forever in this life. Definitely death will come, but the time of death is uncertain. At that time, my body, resources, friends, retinue, and so forth will not follow me even in the least. Like a body and its shadow, I will go accompanied by the wholesome and unwholesome karma that I have accumulated. Then I will take rebirth. Even with regards to taking rebirth, I do not have self-power. I will take rebirth through the force of karma and afflictions. But no matter which of the 6 realms I am born into, there are only abodes of suffering, companions of suffering, and resources of suffering. There is no fully qualified happiness at all. So no matter what, I will attain the state of liberation from these abodes, these 6 realms of samsara. And from among the liberations, I shall accomplish the supreme liberation of Buddhahood. I have experienced intense sufferings continuously in this great ocean of suffering of cyclic existence. And this is due to holding on to the attitude of self-centeredness, selfishness, and neglecting others. So by doing this, cherishing oneself more than others, I acted in ways that caused suffering for others, for myself, and did not do what I needed to do in order to attain liberation and enlightenment. So seeing that cherishing others is the root of all happiness and goodness, and being selfish is the root of suffering, then I will transform my attitude and learn to not care so much for myself and instead practice compassion, love, kindness, and generosity towards others. And in fact, the attainment of Buddhahood depends on other sentient beings. This is because by cherishing them, I will generate the love that desires to accomplish happiness for them and the great compassion that desires to dispel their suffering. In dependence on that, the mind of enlightenment, Bodhichitta, will arise. And in dependence on that, the accumulation of the two collections, such as the deeds of the six perfections and the purification of the two obscurations, will arise. In dependence on that, I will attain Buddhahood. So even the excellent qualities of Buddhahood, great exalted compassion and exalted activities, exist by relying on sentient beings. So all the excellent qualities of the causes and results of the Buddhas are generated in dependence on cherishing other sentient beings. So I will take this as my heart practice and promise that I will continue cherishing sentient beings and not give up this promise, even if my body and life were to turn to ashes. So now imagine transforming your body, your resources, and your roots of virtue into resources that are like wish-fulfilling jewels, and give them to all the beings in hell, the ones experiencing the greatest amount of suffering. And as a result of this, those beings attain a magnificent jewel-like human body that is a support for accomplishing the Dharma. Contemplate that they find perfect dwellings, resources, and companions. And that they meet a virtuous friend that they put themselves under the care of. And they generate the Dharma in their mind and all the realizations. And eventually, full enlightenment, Buddhahood. And then we do the same with all the other sentient beings. So imagine your body, your resources, and roots of virtue transforming into bodies and resources and so on, whatever's needed, and offer these to all other sentient beings, the hungry ghosts, the animals, the human beings, the asuras and the devas, and they all attain a magnificent jewel-like human body that is a support for accomplishing the Dharma. Imagine they find perfect dwellings, resources, and companions. They meet a spiritual teacher, learn the Dharma, accomplish the Dharma, generate Bodhichitta, practice the six perfections, and finally attain Buddhahood. So doing that is training the mind in love, which is wishing happiness for sentient beings, and imagine giving them what they need to be happy. And now to train in compassion, imagine that the sufferings that you yourself will experience in the future, later today, tomorrow, next week, in the coming months and years, future lives. So whatever suffering you will experience in the future and the causes of suffering, imagine all of that coming together and converging on the self-centered attitude in your heart and disappearing there. And then imagine all the sufferings of all the hell beings and the causes of those sufferings, afflictions and negative actions. They also come like a black mass at the self-cherishing, self-centered attitude at your heart and disappear there. Imagine all those beings free of their suffering and the causes. And then do the same with the other beings. Take on the sufferings of all the hungry ghosts. They absorb into the self-centered attitude at your heart and disappear. And then take on all the sufferings and causes of suffering of the animals. That absorbs into and disappears in the self-centered attitude at your heart. And then take on all the suffering and causes of suffering of the human beings. The same. Absorb into the self-centered attitude at the heart and disappear. And do the same with the sufferings of the asuras and the devas. Their sufferings and causes of suffering come and absorb into and disappear into the self-centered attitude at your heart. And imagine all those beings, all those sentient beings of the six realms are now free of their sufferings and causes of suffering. And then think of the objects to be abandoned in the mental continua of the hearers, solitary realizers, and bodhisattvas. So even though they are on their way to liberation and enlightenment, they're not yet there. They still have obscurations. So imagine all those obscurations again coming and absorbing into the self-centered attitude at your heart. Also all the impurities of the environment, all the problems happening in our world today due to climate change, pollution, and all the waste material polluting the seas, the bodies of water, the earth, and the air, and so on. All those impurities also absorbing into the self-centered attitude of the heart. And imagine the environment becoming pure, free of all these impurities. Imagine all those causes of suffering and suffering itself and afflictions and obscurations in the minds of all beings, including yourself, and impurities of the environment, all have vanished, been purified, have become non-existent. And also your self-centered attitude, that too becomes non-existent. So now think, even though you may take the responsibility of dispelling the suffering of others and accomplishing their benefit and happiness through doing this kind of practice with love and compassion, you lack the ability to actually accomplish this. So who has such an ability? The Buddha, the Guru, Lord of Subduers, abiding on my crown, has it. So again, think of the Buddha above your head. So the Buddhas have the ability to help all sentient beings be free of their suffering and causes of suffering. So generate a strong aspiration that thinks, no matter what, I will attain the state of a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. And until I attain Buddhahood, I will not give up this promise that thinks of attaining such a state, even at the cost of my life. And feel that you're taking this attitude, this way of thinking, as the heart of your spiritual practice, and decide to put effort into it to the best of your ability. And so with that state of mind, then I'm not sure how to do this because we probably have different versions of the verses. Maybe I'll just read this version and you can mentally follow it and try to generate these thoughts. Just as the previous Sugatas generated the mind of enlightenment, and just as they dwelt according to the stages in the trainings of a Bodhisattva, likewise, for the benefit of migrating beings, I shall generate the mind of enlightenment, and likewise I shall learn the trainings according to the stages. So we'll do that 2 more times. Just as the previous Sugatas generated the mind of enlightenment, and just as they dwelt according to the stages and the trainings of a Bodhisattva, likewise, for the benefit of all migrating beings, I shall generate the mind of enlightenment, and likewise I shall learn the trainings according to the stages. And then 3rd and last time. Just as the previous Sugatas generated the mind of enlightenment, and just as they dwelt according to the stages in the trainings of a bodhisattva. Likewise, for the benefit of migrating beings, I shall generate the mind of enlightenment. And likewise, I shall learn the trainings according to the stages. After taking Bodhisattva vows, we're supposed to renew it every day. I usually don't do it in such a lengthy way, but a good thing to do, at least, in a brief way. And so that was verses 23 and 24. And then the next verses are just sort of continuing that thought, like feeling joyful about this generation of Bodhichitta, the mind of enlightenment. The verse 25 says, "Those intelligent ones have concluded lucidly seizing the mind of enlightenment in this way, but in order to increase it, they should highly praise it in the following manner." So it's important that we really value, really cherish this mind, this attitude of bodhicitta, and keep in mind how precious it is, how beneficial it is for others, for all sentient beings, but also for ourselves, and really feel a sense of joy, rejoicing that we have generated this mind and are continuing to work on it. So the next verses are like praise of bodhicitta, 26 and 27. "Now my life is fruitful. I have attained a good human existence. Today I have been born in the Buddha lineage. I have become a child of the Buddha. Now whatever happens, I will act to not sully this flawless, holy Buddha lineage, initiating actions concordant with this lineage." So some of you may do the succession guru yoga practice, and those two verses are part of that. It's just feeling joyful, rejoicing that we have taken on this commitment and really firmly reminding ourselves of what we've taken on, and make sure that we do what will be consistent with this this state of mind. And then verse 28 says, "Just like a blind man discovering a jewel in a heap of rubbish, likewise by some coincidence, this mind of enlightenment has been born within me." So that's a pretty powerful image. A blind person or a homeless person, someone who's very impoverished and going through rubbish, which many people in the world do. There are people who go through piles of rubbish looking for food, looking for anything, things they can, recycle, get money for. Many people make a living that way. So if you just happen you're going through the rubbish and you find a jewel, a diamond ring, something incredibly valuable and precious, it's like, wow, this almost never happens. You have now this very, very precious thing. And I'll just read what Pema Chodron says about this. It's quite nice. "Right in the middle of our foulest emotions, we find this precious gem. There in the midst of confusion and reactivity, we find the jewel of bodhicitta. The most negative emotions can serve as the basis for compassion. When we're enraged at some so-called enemy, for example, we could own that negativity and wish for everyone to be free of aggression, including our foe. No matter what arises, we can always find the soft spot of the Bodhi heart. So that's the wonderful thing about the Bodhisattva path. That you don't have to already be enlightened in order to be a Bodhisattva. So your mind can still be full of all kinds of disturbing thoughts and emotions and really ugly, shameful things. But you can still have this aspiration to emerge from this situation and develop compassion and love and bodhicitta and go on to become enlightened. It's not a contradiction. So the two things can exist together. And the negative, disturbing states of mind can actually be part of your practice. That's like in the thought training teachings, the Lojong teachings. We can make use of any situation and any experience, even being angry, even full of rage, even wanting to kill somebody. So even that state of mind can be utilized. As she's saying, you can think, wow, now I know how other people feel when they get angry and they want to kill somebody. I can understand that state of mind because that's where I'm at right now. And then you can transform that into compassion for all those other people who have this state of mind and really wish that you could help them. May I overcome this anger in my own mind so that I can help others to do the same, free themselves from this horrible, painful state of mind. So, the Mahayana teachings, especially the Lojong teachings, are so precious, so wonderful, even to transform these rubbish states of mind that we have and make them part of our path, to have more compassion, more love, more bodhicitta, impel ourselves further along the path. And then next are some verses that give analogies, different analogies for bodhicitta, 8 different analogies. Verse 29 says, this is also the supreme ambrosia that overcomes the Lord of Death of migrating beings. So I think, in the past, maybe, I don't know nowadays, but there was this idea of finding some kind of elixir, some kind of medicine that can cure death so that you can live forever, you can be immortal. So bodhicitta is like that, because with bodhicitta we can help sentient beings be free of samsara, the cycle of having to die and be reborn again and again and again. So it is like that kind of elixir that frees us from the suffering of death. And then this is also the inexhaustible treasure that eliminates all poverty of migrating beings. So poverty is such a terrible suffering when people are poor and they can't even pay their bills or put food on the table for themselves and their kids. So bodhicitta, again, it's not an instant cure for poverty, but eventually with bodhicitta and then helping sentient beings be free of samsara and so on, then that suffering of poverty can be eliminated for all beings. This is the supreme medicine that quells the disease of migrating beings too. So right now they're furiously looking for vaccines, cures for COVID, and that would be wonderful if they can find a vaccine that saves people from that suffering. But then later on, there'll be some other disease that comes along. So even though they find cures for one disease, other diseases appear. But eventually it's possible to be free of all diseases if we free ourselves from samsara and the causes of suffering. And again, bodhicitta is like that kind of medicine that will enable ourselves to be free of samsara, reach enlightenment, and then help everybody else do the same. So it's like a supreme medicine. It is the tree of rest for migrating beings, wandering and weary on the path of conditioned existence. I don't know about this tree of rest, but I guess, yeah, if you're, especially in the desert, or you're making a long journey and you're really hot and tired, and you find this big, wonderful tree with lots of branches and shade underneath. Ah, what a nice place to rest. So it does take a while to get out of samsara, but bodhicitta, compassion, love, give us some respite on this journey. And then it says, 31, it is the universal platform. The commentary says that means bridge. That leads all migrating beings to freedom from the bad migrations. So imagine a bridge going from the unfortunate realms of existence to freedom, to liberation. So bodhicitta provides that. It is the dawning moon of the mind that dispels the torment of afflictions of migrating beings. So the real cause of suffering in ourselves and all other beings is the afflictions, the afflictive emotions. Attachment, hatred, jealousy, and ignorance, especially ignorance, not knowing the true nature of things. So those afflictions are what are responsible for all the different kinds of suffering that we experience. And here it makes it sound like bodhicitta is the thing that eliminates all these afflictions. It's not quite like that. It's actually the wisdom, realizing emptiness, but conjoined with bodhicitta. So in the mind of a bodhisattva, that wisdom is conjoined with, supported by, nourished by bodhicitta. And so that becomes the antidote to all the afflictions, afflictive emotions, and the suffering that comes from them. And then the next verse says, it is the great sun that annihilates the cataracts of ignorance of migrating beings. So this is actually referring to the cognitive obscurations, the knowledge obscurations. So even after afflictive emotions have been erased from the mind, there's still these traces, imprints left over that cause, like cataracts, cause one to see things incorrectly, not as they are, seeing things as truly existing, inherently existing, even though they're not. So those are the knowledge obscurations or cognitive obscurations. So again, the wisdom of emptiness conjoined with bodhicitta clears those away from oneself and other beings. And then finally, it is the quintessential butter from the churning of the milk of the holy Dharma. So butter is made by churning milk. And so they say, the essence of milk is butter. So in the same way, the essence of the Dharma, the holy Dharma, is bodhicitta. That's what enabled the Buddha to become a Buddha. If he hadn't had bodhicitta, he would have stopped at nirvana. Okay, my work's done. I'm just going to sit here and enjoy nirvana. But he didn't. He had bodhicitta, and that, enabled him to go further beyond nirvana, all the way to full enlightenment, and then be able to teach all other beings, guide all other beings, so that they can become free of samsara as well. So it's like such a essential ingredient in the whole of the Dharma, bodhicitta. For all those guests who are migrating beings, journeying on the path of cyclic existence, who wish to utilize the resources of happiness This will place the great travelers of sentient beings in supreme happiness and satisfy them. So all the sentient beings wandering in samsara around and around and around, over and over and over again, but looking for happiness, wanting happiness. So Bodhichitta will provide the happiness that they are looking for, both within samsara, but eventually out of samsara, and eventually all the way to Buddhahood, enlightenment. Today, in the presence of all the protectors, the Buddhas, I invite the migrating beings to be guests in happiness until they attain the state of Sugata. May gods, anti-gods, and so forth be joyful. So this is imagining every sentient being as a guest, inviting them to a great big huge Thanksgiving dinner. Everybody come. No COVID here. Don't worry about COVID. And just providing everything they need to be happy and free of suffering. So let's all be joyful about this. So that's the end of this chapter, chapter 3. And I guess when Venerable was teaching, she went a little further into chapter 4. But when I asked her, what I should do, because I'm almost to the point that she reached, she suggested going over the Bodhisattva vows, because this chapter we just did was about taking the Bodhisattva vows. So that's always helpful to do. And I don't know, some listeners may not have taken the Bodhisattva vows yet, but that's okay. You can still hear them. We can know about the Bodhisattva vows before we actually take them. And I have a file from Alex Berzin about the Bodhisattva vows, and I like it. It's kind of contemporary. It's kind of taking into consideration, contemporary issues and questions and so on. So I thought to go through that. We'll just do as much as we can today and then continue next week. Okay, so he starts by just talking about basic background material. He says a vow, which in Tibetan is dompa, is a subtle, invisible form on a mental continuum, a mind, which shapes behavior. So vows are considered to be form, but not gross form like a table or a body, but a subtle form that can only be seen by mental consciousness, can't be seen by any of the sense consciousnesses. But yeah, that's what a vow is. And it shapes behavior, affects our behavior. Specifically, it is a restraint from an uncommendable action, kanamatawa in Tibetan. An uncommendable action, that's the meaning of kanamatawa. And there are two types of these uncommendable actions. Some that are naturally destructive, for example, killing. That's called rangshingi kanamatawa. The other type is one that was prohibited by the Buddha, chepe kanamatawa. And an example of that would be like many of our vows, eating afternoon. Eating afternoon isn't naturally non-virtuous, but for those who've taken monastic vows, Buddha prescribed that for our practice. Said it's taken on by monastics for their minds to be clearer for meditating at night and the next morning. Yeah. So there's two kinds of these uncommendable actions: naturally negative or destructive, and those that are prohibited by the Buddha. And then in the case of the Bodhisattva vows, he says of the two stages for developing bodhicitta, aspiring bodhicitta and engaging bodhicitta, it's only with the latter, engaging bodhicitta, that we take the Bodhisattva vows. And taking Bodhisattva vows entails promising to restrain from 2 sets of negative acts that Buddha prohibited for those training as bodhisattvas to reach enlightenment and to be of as much benefit to others as possible. So there's 2 sets. One are usually called the root vows, but strictly speaking, they're root downfalls. 18 root downfalls. So these are actions that if we do, we fall down from our Bodhisattva vow. And then there's 46 types of faulty behavior, sometimes called secondary vows, but the term in Tibetan is faulty behavior. So a root downfall means a loss of the entire set of Bodhisattva vows. So if we do one of those 18 actions, we lose the Bodhisattva vows altogether, but they can be retaken. And they're called downfalls because they lead to a decline in spiritual development and hinder the growth of positive qualities. I'm happy to share this file with you afterwards. You don't have to worry about writing down every word. And the word root, why they're called root, is because they are a root to be eliminated. So strictly speaking, they're called 18 root downfalls, but for ease of expression, we usually call them root bodhisattva vows and secondary bodhisattva vows. So these offer excellent guidelines for the types of behavior to avoid if we wish to benefit others in as pure and full a way as possible. And there's different versions of bodhisattva vows, and the one followed in the Tibetan tradition was compiled in India by Shantideva in his text, not this one, but another text that he wrote called Compendium of Trainings, the Shiksha Samuchaya. And the source of these vows, most of them come from a sutra, the Sutra of Akashagarbha Sutra. And then they were brought to Tibet by Atisha, who in turn received them from his master, Dharmakirti, who's sometimes also called Serlingpa. He's the one who lived in Indonesia, the one that from whom Atisha mainly learned Bodhichitta and developed Bodhichitta. So that's how they came to Tibet. So all Tibetan traditions follow this one. It came from Atisha, while the Buddhist traditions deriving from China observe variant versions of the Bodhisattva vows. So probably many of you, when you went for the Bhikshuni ordination, you notice they have a different set of Bodhisattva vows. And this is interesting. The promise to keep Bodhisattva vows applies not only to this life, but also to each subsequent lifetime until enlightenment. Thus, as subtle forms, these vows continue on our mental continuums into future lives. If we have taken the vows in a previous lifetime, we do not lose them by unknowingly committing a full transgression now. Yeah, so when you're like 2 years old and you yell at your mom or something, fight with your sibling, you don't break your vows. And so it's only if we have taken them again during this lifetime, right, then we are responsible for them. But up until that time, we're not responsible for. We don't lose the vows by doing those kind of actions. So retaking the vows for the first time in this life strengthens the momentum of our efforts toward enlightenment that has been growing ever since our first taking of them. So we probably took them in past lives, probably. So we still had them on our mind when we were born, when we were little kids. But then the first time we take them in this lifetime, that is like strengthening that seed or imprint. Therefore, Mahayana masters emphasize the importance of dying with the Bodhisattva vows intact and strong. Their abiding presence on our mental continuums continues building up positive force or merit in future lives, even before we revitalize them by taking them again. So this explanation here in this file comes from Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary that he wrote on the Bodhisattva Vows, which is called An Explanation of Bodhisattva's Ethical Discipline, the Main Path to Enlightenment. Okay, so first we'll go through the 18 root downfalls. The first one is praising ourselves and or belittling others. This downfall refers to speaking such words to someone in an inferior position. The motivation must contain either desire for profit, praise, love, respect, and so forth from the person addressed. So you're saying these words to somebody and you want them to like you, love you, praise you, respect you, or give you something. That's your motivation. Or another possibility is jealousy of the person you're belittling. So if I talk to Venerable Samten about Venerable Semkye, and I'm kind of praising myself and putting her down, then it has to be done with one of these motivations. I want her to love me, praise me, respect me, give me something. That's one possibility. Or I'm jealous of Venerable Semkye. So those are the motivations involved in this, this kind of action. And it makes no difference whether what we say is true or false. So even if you're telling the truth, something that she really did, or something about her that's true, it's still breaking a downfall. I think this can happen with teachers. Like that's probably the main situation in which this would occur. So if you're a teacher, Dharma teacher, and there's another Dharma teacher, and you speak in such a way that you praise yourself or belittle that other teacher, and you're speaking to someone, a third person, and you have one of these motivations in your mind, that would be... Because I've been a few times in situations where maybe let's say there's another teacher, a Dharma teacher, that I've heard certain things about, some misbehavior. And then I meet somebody who says, oh, I want to go and study with that teacher. And it's like kind of tricky. I want to break this vow, but I also want to give some kind of warning to that person. So in a situation like that, you could say something like, just remind the person of the importance of checking spiritual teachers very, very carefully before, making a commitment to them. Or you could say something like, just don't be alone with that person. I don't know. Those are, you don't have to come out and say, oh, he's terrible. He's done this, he's done that. Or she's done this, or she's done that. But, find some kind of skillful way of, I don't know. That's, each person has to figure out what to do in that situation. Anyone been in that situation before?
It's fine to let people know that that person or organization is controversial, and to just check them out, carefully.
And again, the point here is your motivation. Yeah. So this only becomes a downfall if you're doing it for this kind of ulterior motivation. I want you to like me better than him. But if your motivation is compassion and you want to protect this person from possible harm or being misled or getting into a cult or something like that, then that's a positive motivation. And he mentions here, professionals who advertise that they are Buddhists need to take care about committing this downfall. I hadn't thought of that before, but yeah, I do see, sometimes I'll see advertise, like in Buddhist magazines, people who are lawyers or counselors, therapists, and they're advertising that they are Buddhists. Yeah, so I suppose it's possible such a person might, in advertising, that's customary in advertising, to sort of build yourself up, put down your competitors. So that's another situation where this vow could be broken. Okay, number 2, not sharing Dharma teachings or wealth. And here the motivation must be specifically attachment and miserliness. So you're attached to your knowledge or your wealth, your possessions, and you don't share them with someone who wants them and needs them. This negative action includes not only being possessive of our notes or tape recorder, or what do we, that's very old, MP3, yeah, but also being stingy with our time and refusing to help if needed. Yeah. So you could have a valid reason, a good reason not to share Dharma teachings. For example, if you feel somebody's asking for certain teachings that you feel are not appropriate for them. They're a brand new person and they're asking you about Tantra or about emptiness, but you're not quite sure, if they have the necessary background basis to make good use of those teachings. So it's, your motivation here is attachment, stinginess, miserliness. And I recall too hearing an explanation about this, that like when you're in India or a place where there's a lot of homeless people and beggars and so on, and you might pass the same people every day, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, every day asking for money. And it's quite hard, every single day you pass them, you're required to give them money. So one explanation I heard was that, not giving money to all those beggars isn't necessarily breaking this vow, because it's more about a person who really has no one else to help them and no other resources, So, I don't remember exactly. It's just something vague in my mind, what I heard. But if the person asking for help does have other people they can turn to for help, other sources for help, and of course, if you are able to give to them, that's excellent. But if you don't have enough, you don't have what they want or what they're asking for, and you don't give it for that reason, then it's not breaking the vow. So it's more about a person who's really desperate. Like if somebody comes up here and, they're miles away from anywhere else and they're hungry, to not give them food, to not give them something to eat would be, if it's done out of miserliness and attachment, that would be breaking the vow. But if somebody comes up here and they've got a car and they're asking for food, and some other place where they can go and get some food, and the fact that they have a car kind of indicates they're not totally destitute. I don't know. I'm just thinking of that as a situation. So you can see that they're not as desperate as they might make themselves out to be. So anyway, those are just some other considerations there. Because it is hard when you're in India. I'm sure many of you have been in that situation. Do I really have to give to every single one of these beggars every single time I see them? Then number 3, I'll just do one more and then we'll stop. Not listening to others' apologies or striking others. So he says here, the motivation for either of these must be anger. In order to be a downfall, you have to be angry. And the first one, not listening to others' apologies, this refers to an actual occasion when you're yelling at or beating somebody. And either that person pleads for forgiveness or someone else begs us to stop and we refuse. We're not listening when we're being asked to stop. So that's a pretty extreme situation. And the latter, striking others, is simply hitting someone, but with anger, out of anger. And then he goes on, sometimes it may be necessary to give rambunctious children or pets a smack to stop them from running into the road if they will not listen. But it is never appropriate or helpful to discipline out of anger. So even in those situations where there's a child or a pet that's behaving in a naughty way and they're not listening to you, you might have to give them a smack, but you have to make sure it's not out of anger. It's probably easy to say, but from what I've heard from parents, that's not easy to do. But try to have compassion and love, that you're doing it for their good. They need to learn this. They need to learn that that way of behaving isn't appropriate. I've done that a few times with cats when they were catching mice, catching birds. It was hard not to be angry about that, but I thought giving them a smack might teach them this is not a good way of behaving. I don't know if it works, but I don't. Huh?
They just can't remember that long.
Yeah, the instinct is just too strong, too overwhelming. Okay, so we'll stop there. And there's a few minutes left if anyone has a question or if there's a question online.
I have a question about this one about not listening to others' apologies. I either didn't remember or don't remember or didn't ever hear about this actually being any act of striking someone with and not responding to their apologies. It always seemed to me that really it was, I've always taken it as really having to overcome my own anger and accept when people have a genuine regret. So I just wonder if you can, if you can elaborate on that a little bit and its application, because fortunately I'm not too often beating people, but I do things where people apologize and I need to listen.
Yeah, it does seem rather extreme, this situation described here. It is based on Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary. Like in the Red Prayer Book, it just says, not listening although another declares his or her offense, or with anger blaming him or her and retaliating. So it doesn't mention anything about you're actually beating somebody up and they're saying, stop, I'm sorry. Yeah. So, I think just common sense says, if you're on the Bodhisattva path and someone is apologizing for something that they did and you're ignoring them, not listening to them, not paying attention to them, that's pretty clearly not a compassionate thing to do. But there's also on the secondary vows, I forget which one it is, but there's another one similar to that, but I think the motivation is different. Oh yeah, number 19, refusing to accept the apologies of others. But perhaps there it's some other motivation besides anger. This one is specifically if you're so caught up in your anger, can't let go of your anger, that you refuse to listen to them and accept their apology, whereas there could be other unwholesome motivations for not doing that. And there's also probably just different explanations from different masters, different traditions. So,
what does "who wish to pass into nirvana" mean in the context of verse 6 in chapter 3? Buddhas are already in non-abiding nirvana.
What was the question again?
So what does wishing to pass into nirvana mean? Because Buddhas are already in non-abiding nirvana.
Yeah, well, there it means going into like parinirvana. Well, not even that. I think it's more nirvana in the sense of just remaining in a state of bliss, meditating, like the arhats. They go into this state of, mind that's completely free of all the afflictive emotions, all the suffering and so on, and they just meditate in that state without coming out of that state of meditation to help others. So we're asking the Buddhas, don't do that. Continue being in the world, actively teaching and helping and guiding sentient beings. I mean, it's not really necessary to ask that because the Buddhas have already committed themselves to doing that. They will continue being in the world, but it's more for our own sake, just to get in touch with our sense of appreciation of the Buddhas and how important it is for them to continue being actively present in the world, teaching the Dharma and so on. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And then another person is asking, is the context in which one takes Bodhisattva vows very important for the first time? Is it equally significant whether or not it is witnessed? And they
Witnessed?
They clarified that they're asking, does it matter if you've taken with a preceptor who may not have been part of a genuine lineage?
I mean, they do say you don't have to take the Bodhisattva vows from another person. You can do it on your own. But like our pratimoksha vows, the vows of monks and nuns and 5 precepts and so on, those have to be taken from another person, from a qualified, someone who has the right qualifications to give those vows. But that's not the case with Bodhisattva vows. You can just imagine or have an image of the Buddha, or just imagine the Buddha and many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and then take the vows. You can do it on your own. But as far as taking them from someone who's not part of a lineage, I don't know. It's a little dodgy. I mean, better, of course, is to take it from a person who is qualified. But if you did do that the first time, you can always redo it. You can retake Bodhisattva vows again and again and again, as many times. His Holiness often gives Bodhisattva vows. So that's, you can always do it again.
With regard to the Bodhisattva vow as a form, the non-revelatory form, is it similar to the pratimoksha vows, and the difference is just the commitment for that one life, and that's why you lose it for pratimoksha, whereas Bodhisattva is until full enlightenment, but in terms of the form itself, it's the same?
This is a really good question, and it's really complicated. And I had some exchange with Geshe Kelsang Wangbo, who had to go to her teacher, Geshe Tupten, what's his name, Kelsang? And I've got it somewhere on my computer. I'll look it up. What was the answer? And I'll get it back to you next time. It's a tricky thing. Because we say the pratimoksha vows, they're a kind of form, but they end when our life ends. Bodhisattva vows do not. So there's a difference there. But let me check on that question. Okay, so we'll stop there for today.